Hello, welcome everybody. We're very happy to have you joining us today. Nice to see so many eager-looking faces. So I would like to welcome you to PA NASA's Fall Semester Town Hall. We're happy you've joined us. Before we get to the presentation and discussion, which is going to be very exciting, let's start off with a few words from our current president, Christine Carlson, followed by a few more words from our most recent past president, Sandy Harrell. So Christine, would you like to take the mic?
Sure. Thank you, Sharon. Good afternoon, everybody. And I can say that because it's 12:02. As president of PA NOS, I just wanted to take a minute to thank you for attending our first town hall of the academic year. I want to thank Sharon as chair of the Professional Development Committee, as well as the committee itself, for being able to put this together. I'm really excited to see the presentation, but then also to be involved in the conversation that follows. On that note, I'd like to thank Dr. Tom Pantazis, I hope I said that right, from Westchester. And as he leads us through, I just want us to remember that we're not just participants in the workshop today, but this conversation is so incredibly important. And it can have such an impact on the future of education in general. So I'm really excited to see what everybody thinks. And I think it's important too that we acknowledge the good that tech has, and we keep that in mind as we have our discussion. I know personally, using AI has changed a lot of what I do. It saves me a lot of time and energy now. So let's just keep that in mind as we go forward. And I encourage each of you to actively participate, to share your insights, and really engage in a wonderful discussion that will happen after the presentation. So thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next town hall.
Thank you, Christine. Sandy, I believe you have joined us. I think you're muted. There you go.
I was both late and muted, so I'm 2 for 2 today.
Woo! All right, you fill in two squares on the bingo card.
So as we wrap up this fall semester and we're starting to look forward to 2024, I would like everybody to mark your calendars for our annual PA NOS conference. This year's theme is going to be on trauma-informed teaching and building a community of caring. So I think that that's a topic that we can all really relate to right now. We're going to be at the Penn State Lehigh Valley on April 18th and 19th. Overnight accommodation is available, and we will be sending out more information very soon via email and putting it on our website. And we really look forward to seeing you there. So again, that's Penn State Lehigh Valley, April 18th and 19th.
Yeah, save the date. Thanks so much, Sandy. Appreciate that. Anybody have any questions or comments so far? Anything we've forgotten? Okay. Well, thanks both to you, Christine, and to you, Sandy, for getting us started today and keeping us focused on what's important. We're really excited to have Dr. Tom Pantazis here with us today to provide us with some context about the impact of AI on teaching and some practical applications of integrating AI into our teaching practice. He's going to engage us in an interactive presentation, so please do interact and use the chat quite a bit. After his presentation, there'll be time for both questions directed to him, but also then a discussion among all of us who are attending today to discuss the effects of AI on our teaching practices. So Dr. Pantazis is an instructional designer with the Teaching and Learning Center at Westchester University. He loves to help instructors integrate technology and robust learning pedagogy. His research interests include digital instructional video, extended reality, content interactivity, and simulations. But if he's not doing these things and he's not cheering on Philly sports teams, camping, or building with Legos, you can also catch him as the co-host of the Oddly On Air podcast. So welcome, Dr. Pentazis, and I turn the microphone over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate everyone being here today. Folks can see my screen, I hope. Yes, looking good. Excellent. All right. So you had a little bit of an introduction there. I just want to give you a little bit more background real quick so you have a sense of where I'm coming from. I've been in education for the last 16 years, and as of right now, it's evenly split between pre-K through 12 and higher education. And 14 of those 16 years have been in educational technology and instructional design. Right now, I'm at Westchester as an instructional designer, and I work with about 150 faculty every year, helping them with their teaching. So that gives you a sense of the lenses and context that I'm bringing to this talk on AI today. So when ChatGPT arrived in November of 2022, so a year ago at this point, I did what I typically do with new tools, and that's to get it in and try it out. And it didn't take very long in that experimentation for me to realize that these generative AI tools were going to be a little bit different from some of these other educational technology tools that we've seen and had some experience with. And it definitely was going to have an impact on instruction, whether we wanted it to or not. So I recognize that the 150 faculty that I work with were going to be asking me about how do you account for this generative AI in your teaching practice, in their teaching practice. And so I started doing what I think many of you have done, and that's trying to learn more about what it is and how it works. And I did that so that I could turn around and help faculty. And I'm the type of person who's always trying to be just a little bit in front of those folks so that I can be helpful and give them resources and ideas and techniques that can help them be successful. So today's presentation is really a collection of that effort and work that I've been doing on behalf of Westchester's Teaching and Learning Center over the last year. And I've certainly attempted to take all those different elements and make them into a little bit more of a cohesive presentation for all of you. But being completely straightforward, I suspect that there are some folks here with us today that may have some better understanding of certain components of this than I do. And I would just encourage everyone to be active in the chat today. I see somebody was mentioning they like the Flyers tie already, which is great. And in that spirit, I'm going to have some activities, and we have the first one here. Let me know in the chat, what is one thing that you already know about generative AI that you could share with everybody else? I want to get a sense for where we're coming from here today, the group of us that are here. So I'm going to pause and let you type. Christine says it takes excellent contextual awareness to use it effectively. I really like that use of words there. Some students using it, some are not. Lesson plans for AI. It's becoming less accurate. That's a fascinating statement. You can use it to make interesting images. I might need some tips on that. It doesn't give complete answers yet. Oncoming train, question mark. Like the continuing to educate ourselves, Joan, I think you might see that theme come up a little bit here today. All right, well, thank you everybody for some early context here. It's giving me a little bit of a sense of what you already know. So the next kind of question I have for all of you is, how are you feeling about generative AI? And I have a list of some feelings there. It was potentially going to be a poll question, but we can do it in the chat. Come up with a combination of 3 feeling words. You can use what's there. You can do less than 3 if you want. Throw that into the chat. I'm just curious where we're at in terms of how we feel about generative AI and its impacts on education. And Jonathan, I agree that there's already some disparities in effective use. Curious, accepting, patient, nervous, just one word. Thanks for that, Linda. Overwhelming, exciting, optimistic, exciting, confident, overwhelmed. Excited. I like seeing some excited here and some curious, a little bit skeptical. Okay. not sure how they feel yet. I like that too. Seeing some optimism and excitement. All right, I appreciate everybody being willing to share there. Again, it gives me a little bit more context about who you are and why you're here and what you're hoping to get out of today. And I don't know about all of you, but I definitely am feeling a little bit of the overwhelm of trying to stay current with a set of tools that is changing at just a ridiculous pace. And I saw this quote in one of the AI presentations I've been to this semester, and I thought it was a really good reminder, both for myself and for others, that we do not have to try to stay on top of every little thing. We can choose to engage with this topic as we can, and that we're not necessarily going to be left behind. So I just wanted to say again that part of the learning process around this topic is engaging in sessions like these, and I appreciate you taking some of your precious time to be here, and hopefully I can make that a worthwhile choice going forward. So to help me do that, one last question before I get into some content. What are you hoping to know about AI? What are you hoping to learn about generative AI from today's session? I don't promise to answer that question, but I will do my best to try to touch on some of the things that you're interested in knowing more about. So if you want to put those thoughts in the chat here. This also helps me as someone who works with faculty a lot, kind of know what other future presentation topics might be useful if we don't get to your question today. So what is it that you want to know about generative AI and education? Better engagement in learning? How good are the AI detectors? I will touch on that just briefly today. Struggle with academic literacy? Use it in a good way? Ooh, best ways to confront or call in students we think are using it. That's interesting. All right, well, I appreciate again everyone taking a few moments to share some thoughts there. And we'll see what we can get to today as we roll through. So this is a rough sense of where I'm going. I'm going to start just making sure we're operating from some similar definitions and talk a little bit about how the tools work, and then get more into the back half there, how it fits in our context as educators. So I've been to probably a dozen AI webinars over the last year, and I feel like all of them open with some sort of introduction to what generative AI is. And I definitely debated whether I should do that here or not. But I do think it's important that we have some semblance of a consistent definition, or at least you have a sense of the definition that I'm working from. So when I define artificial intelligence, it's a branch of computer science that aims to create intelligent systems capable of perceiving their environment, understanding and interpreting data, learning from experience, and making decisions or predictions. And it involves the development of algorithms, machine learning models, and technologies that simulate or mimic human cognitive abilities such as problem solving, pattern recognition, natural language processing, and decision making. Now, AI is in a lot of things that we use already. It supports our voice systems like Alexa, what's the weather? Siri, give me the directions. Hey, Google, play my playlists. It's certainly impacting video recommendations we get from streaming services, or knowing when to send an email to spam instead of your inbox. And it even can help with things like parallel parking, engaging in autonomous driving, or helping with language translation in real time. Now, that's the very broad AI definition. What we're really talking about today is the generative AI. And I understand that as a subset of that larger AI concept. So what you see on the screen is the basic definition that I'm working from today when I refer to something as generative AI. So I'll give you a second to read that. All right. So it feels like in the last year, a lot of service providers that we engage with in higher education are talking about the AI they're adding into their tool. And what you see on the screen are two different websites that are tracking new AI tool options. And just to give you a sense of that pace of change, in the last 3 weeks from when I originally grabbed these screenshots to when I double checked them yesterday, the count has gone from that 9,390 to 9,917, and the 2,402 tasks to 2,502 tasks. So that really gives you a sense of the pace of change that is occurring in this space. But I do suggest that if you are looking for a specific AI use case, that these two websites are an opportunity to see what tools might be out there. One of the EdTech writers that I really respect, Audrey Waters, was always quick to remind us when new EdTech related things came on the scene that while they may seem like they are relatively new or recent phenomenons, so for example, this is the Google search trend for ChatGPT and it only goes back a year, these tools often have a long history that is important to consider as you interpret and evaluate them. And she also reminded us that we shouldn't take what the founders and the creators of these tools say at face value. We have to be critical of what they're saying. So one of the first questions I ask is, are these tools really all that great? What if they're doing what this New Yorker cover highlights in this cartoon, right? Are we just making a nice pile of garbage? And I ask that question because these text GPTs are sometimes referred to as stochastic parrots because the text that they generate will contain errors and include harmful statements. They're really just parroting back the content that are in their systems. And we have a professor here at Westchester. His name is Andy Famaguletti. He's been studying these tools for a while now, and we had him on recently on our podcast. And he talked a lot about how the information that we get from these generative AIs is information that for the most part is already available via a search of the internet. So when we get excited about this cool new menu plan that they generated for us, it's just pulling information you may have been able to get already that was already out there. And the other piece about this and part of our challenge is we really don't know how these tools work at a specific level. The particular models, the way that they take their parameters and their weights to get to a specific output, we can't trace it through the system. We can't inspect it. So we don't know exactly how it got from our input to the output that it generated. The only thing we can really understand is a larger conceptual level, the algorithms that they use to generate their responses. So from what I understand of these tools, they will take the words and assign a numerical vector notation to it. And that math, that number, allows these words and the relationships between the words to be mapped out. A very simplistic version of this idea is when you think about longitude and latitude for locations on Earth. So with the image I have on the screen, cat is close in vector space to things like dog and kitten, and they can use the math of that to make predictions about relationships. And they go through a series of transformers that probe those relationships and start to analyze those relationships in different ways. And a lot of these models have hundreds of transformers that eventually arrive at that final output. So if you want to get into a lot more of the nuance, the article that I'm showing on the screen there, I thought did a fairly good job of explaining how these models work to those of us that are not super technically inclined, which I would say I am not one of those people. So speaking of popular tools, these are some of the really popular ones on a very broad level. And I personally have had some experience with ChatGPT's free version. I've used Claude a little bit. I, for a while, was using the Bing tool because for at least for a little while, it was giving us the best free access to ChatGPT. I, for some reason, am not very good at generating images with the image generators, so I haven't done a whole lot with DALL-E and Midjourney. These are the popular ones that are out there. But for those of us that are in academia, here's some more academic specific tools that I have come across. I've spent about 15 minutes using Elicit, and I think there's a lot of potential with that tool to help in the research process in terms of hunting down articles, giving you some summaries, and really helping you get started with some research projects. I've also seen a demo of Nolj, the third one down. And while it can speed up the curriculum creation process, I I do think it's a little like overrated for the cost that they want. And I have heard some good things about Conmingo, which is the one associated with Khan Academy, that tool is doing the best when it comes to student data privacy and things around student data. Not saying they're doing a great job, it's just doing better than some of the others. And this is just a small sampling of some of the tool options that are out there. So it's your turn again. This next question is just a simple yes or no question. Have you used generative AI tools for more than 30 minutes in total? And that can be spread out over multiple uses. I'm just looking for cumulative time spent using some of these generative AI tools. So I saw a couple yeses, and now now the no's are showing up. Does lag time count? Andrea, that's a great question. I'll say no. Lag time does not count because it does take a few seconds a lot of times for responses to generate. That's a great point, Andrea. No. Okay. All right. Sharon, I like that qualification there. So we have a little bit of a mix here in terms of the yeses and nos. It looks to be fairly evenly split. So I'm going to come back to that question in a moment. So good for us to know there. So one of the underlying concerns I've heard from folks is that AI is going to come take our jobs. But I think we in education are safe for the time being. And I say that because teaching is inherently a creative profession. We're never really operating under the same circumstances. Our students are changing, the disciplines are changing, the contexts we're operating in change. And I say that because thus far I haven't seen AI that really can generate new things that can be creative and create new product. Really what I've seen thus far is its ability to take current existing things and repurpose them. But I do think it's important for us to be careful a little bit about the way we're framing AI in education. And Jason here, I saw this just a couple of days ago on LinkedIn. I think he frames that concern better than I could. So take a minute to just read through that post there. I particularly like that he's highlighting the aspects of who we are as human beings, as teachers, but also that there's still a role for AI to play in augmenting the work that we do. And I'm going to give some examples of that in just a few moments. And I do think it's important too that as we keep talking about AI, that we're finding ways to talk about all the human work that we do that still can't be done by these generative AI tools. But I contrast this position of it's not going to take our jobs with maybe it will. Planet Money did a 3-part series where they asked the question, can AI take our jobs? And then their jobs being podcasters. I highly recommend these 3 episodes as a very well-told, fun way to see how you could potentially do a similar thought experiment for your own work. In their context as podcast creators, when they tried the generative AI tools, the tools did a really good job of generating questions they might ask folks. It had an uncanny knack for generating some interesting elements of telling the story that they were trying to tell. But I don't want to spoil the ending. You'll have to listen for yourselves to find out if the Planet Money folks are threatened or are still comfortable that their job will exist even in this world of AI. But these episodes do a really good job of kind of probing that particular question. So thus far, I've shared some different perspectives, asked a couple questions of you. We've really talked very broadly about Gen AI. And I ask these things because I think it's important that we are starting to engage with these tools and really exploring the ways that they can help us do the work that we do. And I think Seth Godin's quote here captures that idea really well. And what I like about Seth's quote is that part about how can we use these things to make something better, to make our world a better place, to help our students be better individuals than they were before they came into contact with us. And Jonathan, I appreciate your comment there about how AI is helping us to think more about what we do and how to bring more of our humanity into the work that we do. So let's get into AI in education, right? The real reason that we're here. And I've emphasized a little bit that idea of how much are we using these tools, because according to a recent Inside Higher Ed article, the students are using them a lot more than we are as faculty and staff. And we need to, in order to find out what these tools are good at and what they can help us with, we have to be using them and trying them and testing them. And I will say, both based on the reading that I'm seeing and conversations I'm having here on my campus, we faculty and staff are not experimenting and exploring with these tools enough yet to really know where they can help us and where we should avoid using them. And related, just a small tangent here, this showed up on a report I saw within the last month as well, that it looks like students outside of the US are potentially engaging with these tools more so than students here in the US. And I thought that was an interesting little tidbit. So I threw that in there just for folks to catch and to see, because it relates to on how are we as educators thinking about the ways we're bringing it in and helping our students engage with these tools that exist now. And it does appear that using AI helps. This is an often cited research study that was done that had some folks doing tasks in a consultant firm, and they found that those that used AI had a quality improvement over those that did not. And so it does help when we bring these tools into our work processes. But figuring out how to do that is a little bit of a challenge. As these models continue to grow and learn, what the AI tools are capable of is not a static progression. They're kind of like our students in some respects. The yellow dotted curvy line that you see on this screen, that represents a series of tasks that are of equal difficulty. So those pink dots are different tasks. They're all equally difficult. The solid pink line that you see rolling through that curves around, that's representing what the AI is capable of doing. So the first task, the first circle there on the yellow dotted line, falls within the AI capabilities. And then the second one is outside the AI capabilities. And the third one is kind of right on the edge. And this was a concept that Ethan Mollick presented called the jagged frontier. But we can't figure out what AI is good at until we start trying it out and using it for various tasks. And I saw just today a similar sentiment articulated by Michael Feldstein, who is a pretty prolific ed tech writer. He was articulating a similar concept that we need to use to figure out what they're good at. So how do we do this in education with our students? Here's a 4-part AI literacy skill set that may help you as you start to engage these tools. So getting comfortable with them, understanding what they work is that first step. Then starting to use and apply them in different scenarios is that second step. And then applying that, how do these outputs fit in the work that we do? How do they help? Do they not help? What can they speed things up for us or allow us to do new and different things? But also making sure that we're keeping a human-centered approach as we go through that process. And a quote here on that is that faculty can play a key role in leading ethical conversations to ensure that students are using the tools meaningfully and that students are following suit. And one thing I want to point out about this AI literacy skill set is that this was developed before the ChatGPT craze hit the scene. This article was published in 2021, and this popular understanding of generative AI didn't really kick off until December of 22. So once you start to have a grasp yourself, then this 4-step infographic from Carroll College gives you a way to think about how you can approach it with your students. clarifying what your own generative AI beliefs are with your students up front, communicating your standards, upholding those expectations, but then also continuing to engage in conversation and discussion as these tools evolve. They don't remain static. So as we continue to grow in our understanding. So time for another interaction. I'm curious where you fall on the spectrum of AI use for educational purposes. And you can combo these if you need to, like if you're in between use with citation and use with permission, or but in the chat, if you'd willing, share a little bit about kind of your perspectives on where you fall with AI use in education. Three, four, use with citation. And I didn't define these very well, so it's interesting. We may how do you use AI with citation? That's a good point, Mike. Yeah, so now we're getting into the nuance that I didn't really get into. We didn't define what we mean by some of these things. Okay. I appreciate we see a little bit of the spectrum there. I know personally, I am perfectly comfortable with students using generative AI for anything that they want to use it with. They just have to tell me that they used it. I did not want to be policing this in any way, shape, or form. But I was curious to know how students were approaching it and what they felt like they could use it with. And I didn't want them to feel like they had to hide it from me. I did not want them to feel like they needed to be sneaky. So I appreciate everybody sharing your context there, because that's an important part of understanding where you're coming from into the classroom, is knowing how you feel about it so you can articulate that to your students. So here's some different roles of how we can use generative AI tools in our educational practice. And thus far, I have not found a better framework for thinking about the ways in which AI can augment, and when I say AI, I mean generative AI, can augment and support our work in teaching. So we're going to practice with a couple of these ideas through some examples here. But I'll give an example for the last row there of a tool. How would you feel if a student used a generative AI tool to generate a study guide to help them prepare for a test in a course? I know I would be perfectly comfortable with that because they would still need to be able to know what topics they need to ask the tool to generate questions for, generate examples or things to help them prepare. And if that speeds up the process of getting them to engage with the content, I would be okay with that. I don't see that as any form of cheating, so to speak, or trying to get around the work of learning. And Sharon, I appreciate you saying it seems like an effective, appropriate use. So I have a series of some different types of activities that you can do in education. And for each one, I'd like you to put in the chat which of these uses you think it might address. Is it a mentoring thing, a tutoring, coaching, teammate, student, simulator, or tool? And I do have the short role descriptions included as well. So here's one example. Students can use generative AI tools to provide feedback on their work. That you can do it as a guided exercise, or students can do it independently. In this example, it also talks about instructors submitting student work to an AI tool for initial feedback ideas as part of an assessment process. When I first wrote this in January, I thought that was a great idea, but as I've spent more time thinking about it, I'm not sure that we want to be doing that with student data like that in terms of into some of these tools. It's the kind of thing I would want to make sure we're using a tool that's been approved by a university for handling student grade data in that way. So what do we think? This example, is it a mentor example, a tutor example, a coaching example, a teammate example, a student example, a simulator example, or a tool example? Put your guess in the chat there. Or Chris, I appreciate you going first, Chris. 2 votes for mentor. Anybody else have any thoughts? Some folks not sure. Okay. coach. Interesting. The challenge with some of these is that they can bleed across some categories, and I'm not actually asking you to explain them. You might have a good explanation. My first pass was that this was a mentoring activity, right? It's providing feedback to students on their work. But I could see some of these other pieces depending on how you use it. So appreciate everybody throwing some thoughts in there. Let's try another one out. This is my personal favorite for using generative AI, is having the tools create personalized learning plans for students, where they kind of say, like, I want to learn about this topic, and here's the things that I already know and the things I'm not so sure about. What steps and resources could I use to get better at that? So using generative AI to create personalized learning plans for students, what would that be an example of? So the coach tool tutor concepts, that's kind of where my head was at with these. Jonathan, I really like your comment there in the chat about this feels so much like academic coaching, learning specialist work. Um, I I am not an expert in those spaces, but I am very curious if there's opportunity there for students that need some guidance, if these tools could help speed those processes up in any way or capacity. And that to me is a great example of those ways that we need to be testing and trying this out in certain contexts to see if it's useful and or helpful. So I appreciate you putting that in the chat. All right, next example. This one I feel like has gotten a lot of attention in education spaces, where we can use generative AIs to just generate lots of examples of different scenarios or settings or concepts that students then can do comparison across to try to get at an understanding of something. Well, and it's also a way to probe how generative AI doesn't always come out with accurate information. So if you have a couple examples from a couple different generative AI tools, students can do that analysis to look across and see what they're missing or including. What do we think this one is? Teammate, student tutor, coach. I'm a social studies teacher by initial training, and we have a particular lesson type in social studies called a concept lesson, where students look at different examples of a concept and then have to tease out a definition from that. And I spent hours like trying to find the right example to bring into that lesson. Now with a generative AI, I'm sure I could run that and get some examples like super quickly. So teammate, student, I don't know. Appreciate that honesty, Mike. Sometimes I look at these and go, I don't know either. Simulator, student, simulator. I said simulator in a tool, depending on how it's used. But again, I think it depends on the context and the way that you're approaching it. But I appreciate everyone putting some thought into this. I skipped one. This is an interesting one I saw from Jason Johnson does a podcast where they're trying to talk about AI and humanizing online learning. So there's kind of some interesting concepts together. But this is one where you get the AI to generate some solutions, and then students have to rank them with explanations. And then you can kind of add on to that where students have to come up with their own and put it into the context. So what do we think about this one? Where do we think it falls in the spectrum of those ways in which we can use generative AI? Yeah, I like Coach Simulator as options there from the folks that put that up there. So it could be a tool as well. I see that as, all right. We seem to be a little more agreement on this one, so I appreciate that. We can use generative AI as debating partners. And I like the idea of having students like practice their understanding of a concept by trying to debate a bot about something, because they have to bring their experience to it. And there's also the aspect of seeing the AI tool's response and having to parse, like, is that an accurate response or is the thing making up information? So I like the way that an activity like this might force students to think in some different ways. So what are our thoughts on this one? A fun alternative for this too is to have the AI put the perspectives into like a rap battle form or something like that. I actually think this is a good example of a student where the bot is acting as another student in this context. It's receiving the student's explanations and having to turn around and give something back. But I could also see it as a simulator too, where you're doing a deliberate practice. Sharon, that's an interesting observation. All right, this is the last example activity I have. It's full incorporation. You just bring it all the way into the writing process. They can use it completely. And you just ask students to kind of show their work, right? What prompts did they use? What did they get originally? How did they manipulate it? I think there's actually some very interesting context that can come out of that. Because students could be like, yeah, I'm going to change this. You can ask, why did you change that? Or you can engage in some dialogue around that. So I think there are places where fully incorporating the generative AI tools into the writing process can be valuable and beneficial. I'm not going to ask you to guess on this one. We've practiced that enough. There's a whole host of options out there around using AI in education. The lab there on the left, like, is how to explore different tools. There's a collection of 101 creative ideas, and I can provide the links to these afterwards if folks are interested. I just found this one yesterday. It looks pretty good coming out of Harvard. So in terms of finding activities, there's a lot out there at this point that you can draw on. And I think kind of the next stage for us is starting to distinguish them from just people throwing things out there to starting to see them get organized by our disciplinary expectations and requirements. So now that we've thought about it a little bit, consider this quote from someone who's definitely paying close attention to AI and learning, Ethan Mollick. I think it's thus far a fairly accurate one that for the most part, AI can contribute to most types of assignments that we ask and that are out there right now. And to someone's point earlier about detecting it, I still don't see any sort of tool that can reliably detect any sort of AI writing output. And I had some conversation with English instructors who are like, well, I can kind of tell based on my experience as a writing instructor. And what I would say to that is you can probably tell for the students who aren't particularly good at using the AI tools, because it doesn't take a whole lot of prompting and putting things back through to get outputs that can fool people if you know what criteria that those people would be looking for. So this is the friendly reminder that we really can't detect this stuff in a way that would allow us to police student work. So what does that mean for us? Well, as you think about AI use in education, consider how these generative AI tools may help you to push students into doing more higher order work faster than you might have been able to do in the past. Because again, generative AI is not really creating new things. That's still going to be a human skill for a while. And that idea is represented here on this graphic from Oregon State University eCampus. That kind of faded triangle shows what AI is good at doing, capable of doing, maybe is the right word. And I also like to show this graphic because I think that Oregon State folks have some really good resources out there if you're interested in doing some exploring. And then this quote, which I will pause to let you read, also captures that idea a little bit. So take a moment to read that. I think this is going to be our challenge, is figuring out how to bring the tools in ways that can do this speeding up so that students can get to some of these more challenging tasks and activities. For those of you who have not done a whole lot with generative AI tools yet, this is a very broad framework that can help you think about your approach. And I'm going to provide an example of this with that study guide example I used earlier. So for the assignment, we used the AI tool to generate a study guide for our upcoming test. That was the goal, that they were going to generate a study guide to help them with their test. So then in terms of the prompt, the students needed to figure out what to ask the generative AI to get the study guide. So what were the topics that were going to be on the test? And we also talked just briefly when I did this with students about how to structure prompts. And I have an example of that in a moment. Then the students had to review the output and kind of do some analysis. How effective was that, what it gave back for the study guide? And the students pulled out the parts that they liked and then left what they didn't like behind, and then kind of filled in the gaps, which is that last part, that editing, right? They added the pieces that they needed. But by going through that process, they were able to generate those study guides a lot faster than if they were going to do it on their own. And so this framework really helped us as we went through that process. So in terms of prompt construction, here's a kind of a simple set of steps. Give the AI tool some context about who it is. You're a college professor, you're a marketing writer. Then give it the directions that you need it to do. What do you need it to generate? If you can provide some examples, say something like, make it like this example here, and then provide the example. And then if there's some steps you can give it to do, like generate it, then revise it, then do this next thing. That structure seems to work fairly well for some of these generative AI tools. And interesting little piece I discovered and learned about within the last month, and I believe people did a study on this. If you add some encouragement for the generative AI to do its best, the outputs tend to be better. And that just shows how we don't really know how these transformers and the models are interacting with each other and how they're picking up on the relationships between all these words. But if you encourage your generative AI when you're creating your prompt, it gives you a slightly better output. It is freaky. It's weird. But I don't, again, coming back to Andy had a comment about prompt engineering. So take a second to read that. And so he's cautioning here not to fall down the prompt engineering rabbit hole. Teach them basics, but then give students some resources to help, but try to invest more time and energy as we work with students on these topics about helping them critically evaluate and understand how the tools work and their impacts. And if you're interested in hearing more about Andy talk about that, just this past Wednesday, we had a podcast episode with him come out that you can certainly check out. And we have part 2 coming out tomorrow. And these are 2 English faculty here at Westchester talking about how they're engaging with AI in their teaching. So you might pick up a few pieces from them. So if we're going to help students with the critical thinking part and the analysis part, there are some concerns with these AI tools that we should be keeping in mind and also helping students recognize. And I think most of these are probably fairly common. Y'all have probably heard these at this point, but just to make sure we're touching on them. These models have been trained on content, and some of the content may have been used without permission of the copyright holders. And I think that is a poor choice on those companies' decision making, because it's not showing respect for the work of individuals. The other side of this too is that the way these tools are deployed can discriminate against communities, and very much so depends on the data that a model has been trained on. One of the things I was reading out of the UN was talking about how some of these models have a very Western bend, and they tend to ignore Africa and South American countries and cultures in the way that they report things. And speaking of Andy from Magaletti, again, he was just doing a test that he had it ask the systems to generate crazy stories, and he saw a very particular pattern in the surnames that were generated over and over again. And that was a good example of that Western Bend idea. The other thing too is that these AI tools are huge resource hogs. They use a lot of metal, a lot of plastic, and lots of power to make them run. Training a model uses as much energy as powering 30 homes all year, and it's 25 tons of CO. That's like driving the car around the planet 5 times, just so that you can come up with a list of jokes. And I've even heard Microsoft's considering building its own nuclear reactor just to power all of this AI. So it's very resource intensive. And then also there's a lot of bias, especially in the image generation. A lot of these models have had poor training on darker faces, and there's definitely an overemphasis of white males in professional representations from the image generators. And a really good talk, TED Talk, that touched on some of these things, and I can share that link as well, where the speaker, her first name is Sasha, I don't want to butcher her last name, was trying to get us to realize that there are real risks with these tools right now that we should be focused on, and not so much worried about the Terminator risks down the road, which I know sometimes people have talked about. So in terms of some future use for education, I have a quote from a UN report on the left and an example from Michael Feldstein on the right. The quote on the left, we probably can generate some models and build some generative AI tools that are going to help us with educational practices, building lesson plans, quizzes, interactive activities. The University of Delaware has 10 years worth of video classroom recording transcripts for some courses, and they're trying to take those transcripts and build a generative AI model around them so that students can go for those classes and get study guides and assistance from the generative AI model. That's a really interesting use case that's like that idea on the left, where we're building specific things to help our learners in specific contexts. And then the example on the right, Michael Feldstein is getting together a group of people who are trying to build a generative AI tool that's going to help with the development of online courses and speeding up those processes. So he's blogging about that experience, and it's fascinating, again, use case. So as I wrap up here, my kind of big picture thoughts, 4 of them. There's so much variability in our individual use cases that it's up to each of us individually to probe AI tools to find out what's going to work for us in our settings, how it's going to help us, how it's going to help speed things up. Just yesterday, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if I can get the AI to review the transcript and then tell me where we should take things out when I go to edit for a podcast. And that was a use case that, if it worked, would speed things up. So I've done the initial part of getting it to tell me where in the original interview we could take some things out. Now I'm going to go do my normal editing process, and then I'm going to compare the two and see how well it did. That's an example of a case for my specific context. I think to use these generative AI tools well, it still requires us to do a lot of critical thinking, to evaluate those outputs against things that we know and criteria that we know. Constructing the prompts themselves is a skill that involves some creative work, trying to figure out how to write it in a way that gets to what you're trying to get. And thinking through the problems of, okay, I have this output, how can I make it better? I think those are still valuable things. So engaging with these tools helps develop some good skills. We're already seeing some efficiency gains. We need to be careful that we're not overusing the tools, that we're not using it to replace people. For example, I saw a cartoon saying that someone had the AI generate a summary from a meeting to bullet points to go out in an email to everyone. And then the person who got it used the AI to take the bullet points and turn it back into a summary that they could read. So you had total wasted effort by both parties. One person turned it into bullet points, the other person turned it back into a summary. Education version of that is you use it to generate questions that you give to the students, who then use the AI to answer the questions That's AI is doing all the work in both those examples. And then the last piece is continuing to think about how we can use these tools to create the future that we want, and making sure that we're building something that values each other and helps us be our best selves without breaking the world that we live in. So, what did you learn about AI today is the last engagement for you, and then we can move into some questions. Thanks, Michelle and Linda and Christine. Sandy, I appreciate the way you framed that. I would agree with that, Mike. Thanks, Chris. All right, now I can see everyone again.
Thanks so much, Tom. That was, I don't know how everybody feels about this at this point. I feel both inspired and a little unsettled, and really excited. I mean, what a rich set of resources. You gave us a beautiful context, and then, there's so many resources. I'm so pleased that this has been recorded so that we can go back and consult. I kept feeling tempted to, as we do now, right? Sort of, oh, you hear about something and you want to look it up right away. And I'm like, no, he's on to the next thing and I need to know about that. So it's like I say, I'm really inspired. Obviously, I'm excited and a little unsettled, as I think maybe we all should be. Any kind of innovation, anything that's new, it's appropriate, I think, to sort of question. So you've given us a tremendous number of resources and things to think about here.
If there's a way to easily share, I'm happy to provide the slide deck, which has all the links to everything.
Well,
So
I would certainly appreciate that. That would
Yeah.
be awesome. I know I speak for everyone present and anyone who's going to be watching the recording. So thanks so much for that. We do still have some things coming in the chat. I don't mean to talk over them, but I also wanted to open up so that we can hear each other's voices. And if anybody would like to unmute themselves and begin to talk. I know we're all have a lot of things going on in our minds, inspired by what Tom has shared with us.
So I do see one question from Andrea about how much longer do you think AI tools will be free? And so I'm already in our work noticing a little discrepancy because the free version of ChatGPT, I think, is on 3.5 and version 4 is out now too. But 4 has these new, like, I don't even know what to call them, like integrations. And I went to try one the other day and you couldn't use it unless you were on 4. And so like that was a discrepancy that I can't even explore that piece yet here. But you're going to start to see AI tools embedded into things more. Microsoft has what's called their Copilot, where you're going to see the AI get embedded into the Microsoft Office suite. And Google's Bard is headed in the same direction. So there are going to be versions of the tool that'll be available through our Office suite tools that are out there. But then there are also things that you will have to pay for. So it's going to be a mix. Is I think where it's headed. And you can build your own without too much investment as well. And that's the part that scares me a little bit from an education standpoint, is students could build their own models to use with their specific use case. And that's where I say detectors aren't reliable. Like they could build it to sound like them, and there's nothing that's going to be able to pick that up. So that's a great question. How much longer do you be free? And I didn't really touch on it, but there is a discrepancy. If you have some students that have access to paid versions and students who don't have access, now you have an inequity that's set up. I don't see institutions, at least our institution, doing a whole lot to figure out how to address that yet. Because traditionally it's been, all right, we'll provide a tool for everybody to use. So it's a good question and a good thing to talk about on your campus.
Yeah, I see another question from Garija, who says, my question is a bit different. Should institutions be coming up with policies regarding the use of AI even before faculty and students have a clear understanding of what AI is and what its capabilities are?
This is a good question. There's the way I've been thinking about it is in two different ways. Universities have the business operations side, the staffing side of the functioning, the running of the institution, where I think they do need to have some AI policy in place relatively quickly, right? What data are you allowed to put into systems? Are you allowed to use systems or not? Those to me are very IT related questions that should be getting answered at this point. In the same way that we had acceptable use policies for internet and technology and things like that. On the teaching side, though, I see a different equation because there's lots of different use cases. And if we're trying to prepare students for, let's say, marketing, and lots of marketing organizations are now using this to help write copy, you would want students to be prepared to use those tools in that context. But then you also have folks teaching writing who may not want students to use an AI as they're learning some basic writing concepts. So maybe they don't want to use it in that setting. So how does an institution address a policy from that educational side that's going to fit all those use cases? And speaking from our institution here, at least on the education side, it was left up to the individual faculty members to make the right decisions for their courses. And I think that is, at least I think that's a wise choice for us here at Westchester. So.
Anyone else with concerns or questions? Any experiences you've had so far already using AI? Are you using it,
So,
in your teaching practice?
Jonathan, you make that point about the various versions of everybody using some different version of AI policy. I heard about an institution that wanted to keep the spectrum in place, but defined like the 4 versions out there, came up with icons for each one, and then said to faculty, y'all can pick from this spectrum, but you have to use the icon as a way to try to help communicate with students. Like, this is what's allowed in this course. And I thought that was a really wise way of standardizing the communication, but still giving some flexibility for folks to make those distinctions. I don't remember what institution it was, so I can't tell you where to go look to see their example, but
I have a question. I think what we've been trying to figure out is how to sort of, for lack of a better word, police it, right? When we make these policies, how do we hold them, right? How do we hold students to them, identify when AI is being used inappropriately, and then make that happen? We we run a testing center, and we're struggling. Faculty were telling us students were using AI in our testing center, and I don't know if that was true or not, right? We're trying to figure out how to identify when that's happening and prevent it, identify it.
So I have struggled to figure out how to articulate this well. So that's going to be my caveat here up front. I may not say it as well as I intend to, but what I think generative AI tools are doing is that they are starting to expose some of the ways we have traditionally tried to measure or assess student learning. And they are forcing us to start rethinking some of those practices. And I say that because do we really know what a student has learned in a class if we don't ask them? Because they could come into your class having already learned the content. So just because they got A's on everything they did they really learn anything in that class? And I don't have good answers. If I did, I'd be making a lot of money. But how do we set up our classroom environments that allow students to learn and explore the topics of our courses in ways that they get excited about, but we can still like point to evidence of that learning? Because these AI tools, I don't, you can't, there's no way to detect them. You can't really police it. The students are going to use it. So how do we create the right overall structures around it that are going to let them still learn and grow in ways that we can still kind of say, yeah, I agree with that assessment, right? That they're not faking it or trying to do the situation where the exchange of I give you this work and you give me the grade. That's the piece that I think is going to get really disrupted. And I don't have answers on how to fix it yet. Still working on that.
Yeah, and the piece where the grading is all about the product and not the process as well. You know, it's a lot easier to grade a product that sort of lands on your desk or in your inbox or something. But, you know, what we're really talking about is a lot of times, you know, that we'd like our students to take away is a deeper understanding of the process, or processes,
Yeah.
you know, to get from point A to point B.
We Michelle is here from our institution. I don't know if Michelle went to, we did a writing thing in generative AI at the start of our fall semester. And one of the things we asked our faculty in that was to respond to a question like immediately, right off the bat. And I'll do it here with all of you. You don't have to tell me the answer, but just think about what your answer would be. It's either a yes or a no to this question that I'm about to ask you. And it's very telling about how you think about generative AI. So it's either yes or no. Don't try to explain your answer to yourself. Come up with that answer right away, and then we'll go from there. So here's the question. Do you trust your students? And I think it's pretty telling, the results there in terms of how you're approaching your approach to generative AI. And I know for me personally, I want to say yes. I want to say yes, but I don't know that that would be my first reaction. And that's something I got to keep wrestling with as it relates to how I'm going to approach generative AI in the classroom. Kristen, depends on the student. Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
I think about that in particular with the developmental students that we're working with, right? Who are in so many cases, they're still learning how to learn what learning means, right? And this is an easy way. It can be seen so quickly as a quick and easy way to produce an assignment, because they're still in that. Many of my students, anyway, are still in the mindset of let me produce something, you grade it, and that it's that transaction, right? So I see a lot of openings here for the developmental students in particular to start thinking about thinking. You know, what is AI thinking? What's helpful about that thinking? It's almost like metacognition on, you know, for the AI as well as for their own thinking. I don't know if metacognition can be applied to something else, but that's not even really thinking. So I'm excited after this. I haven't taught a writing class, even though I'm a writing instructor in a bunch of in a while, because I've been doing a lot of FYE stuff. But so I'm teaching a research writing course in the spring that I'm nervous but also excited about. So, well,
Michelle knows who her instructional designer is here at Westchester. It happens to be me, so she knows who she can go to.
Arlen put something in the chat a bit ago. And Arlen, I don't know if you wanted to unmute yourself or not. I'd be happy to read your chat. You said that your main practice this semester is to encourage your students to use ChatGPT as an alternative to using search engines to help them get started. And he explains that students are seniors in the teacher education department. I thought that was really interesting.
Interesting variation on that I've heard of is to use multiple generative AI tools with the same search prompts and see what you get back. And then that gives you some opportunity to do a little compare and contrast. It's almost like crowdsourcing a little bit to see if you get any information that if it's different across all three tools, then what's going on there. Is that something it's making up? And between Bard and Bing and probably Claude, which is through Anthropic, that's 3 different models that you could work off of for free or close to free that would potentially allow for that. It's hard to tell that prices change every day, it seems like.
I was just to sort of circle back until somebody has, another comment or question to what Michelle was saying.
Well,
You
I
know,
see.
a lot of times with the developmental students with whom I work and have worked for many years, they sort of have the imposter syndrome in college, the concern I don't really belong here. And the last thing you want to do is reveal, all your vulnerabilities. I mean, as adults, it's not developmental students, it's life, but that's, sort of a population of people that we're talking about right now. I can see their temptation. This also circles back, Tom, to your question. Do you trust your students? Yes, I trust them, but I also recognize that, many of them in that situation are looking for a way to convince themselves and others that they do belong, or at least not to send up, the flares that they don't, there's something that they're insecure about. So I think it is really important for us to figure out how to make this a tool that is effective for them. I think we should expect that they're going to use it, and it's up to us in collaboration with them to find a way to make it a tool that leads to greater self-understanding and learning, and not just producing a product that is another charade. So just to connect some comments that we've already made.
Kristen, it's an interesting, I mean, there's you wrapped a lot of issues in that one little comment there, which is fascinating. Part of my approach early on in the spring and January and February of this current year, 2023, was I had some friends, some colleagues in the business world, in the bank, they were in startup tech and then the banking world. They were already using these tools at that point for work that they did. So my perspective at that point was, if we know these tools are out in the working world, then are we doing a disservice to our students if we're not giving the opportunity to begin learning how to use them and evaluate them and analyze results and engage in that? And so if we just don't do it at all, I think we're not helping them. But then we also don't want them to do what Michelle talked about, use it as a shortcut to learning, right? Sometimes we have to engage in learning processes that is work. So how do we strike that balance? How do we help scaffold for them through those processes? So I'm teaching a course on college reading and study skills, and we did the study guide activity in that course as a way to show them, like, you can use these tools in positive ways, but there's still work around them, and we talked about that. But like, I don't think you can put your head in the sand on these tools. It's not like some other things that have been out there.
I had somebody, a colleague, say that this is like when smartphones came out, right? And there were a lot of people who were trying to hide and saying, "Oh, well, you can just tell them they can't bring their phones." It's not allowed. I'm like, yeah. And eventually, we all came to realize, no, we're all going to use the smartphones and we're all going to have them, right? And so, similar kind of thing. Or one gentleman actually said it's like when calculators came into use. It's a little older,
Yeah.
but it was the same kind of thing.
I think there's great value in you demonstrating from your disciplinary context how you would tackle trying to understand this tool and doing it with students, right? As a historian, I'm like, what can I use this for? Let's try it. Like, doing that thinking work with them, I think there's great opportunity there. And it's going to be different for every discipline, for every context. But that does take a little bit of vulnerability as an instructor, right? To go into a situation not knowing exactly how it's going to turn out. But we're all pretty good at this, I would think. Like, put some structure for yourself in place and take a class period and give it a whirl and see what happens. Then tell us all how it went, because that's the other part that's important too.
As a contrast to the process product line of discussion that we had earlier, I'm in the process of producing my tenure and promotion application packet, such and such. And I've got to tell you, hopefully no one here is on the promotion committee at my university, but it is a complete pain in the ass. My talent is connecting with students and teaching them and advising them, not tooting my own horn. And I found Chat GPT so helpful at producing very well-written paragraphs that say nice things about me, while I can focus on the other part of the task, putting together all the documentation and organizing it all. So sometimes we got to focus on the process, sometimes we got to focus on the product. But at least for me, well, let's see if I actually get promoted. It may have been very helpful.
And that's an example of the efficiency piece that I like, right? That you're still going to read through that, right? You're going to make sure it's saying accurate things. You're going to tweak it. You're going to bring in your own pieces, but it just took the writing that you were going to struggle with and cut it down for you so that you can put time into things that are more meaningful. Now, there's a lot of questions around that, like, is it worth whatever the environmental impact is, right? We still have a lot of exploring to do there, but I do like that as an example of how for us as professionals, it can help speed some things up to free up our time to do other meaningful things.
Yeah, and coincidentally, when Sharon, Juanita, and I got together earlier, we were like, we need to come up with some town halls, like professional development opportunities for our colleagues. And I went straight to Chat GPT and said, give us some examples of town hall topics that we could pursue. So yeah, it really can get the juices flowing in terms of brainstorming and efficiency in producing a product.
I had an instructor who was like, I need some examples about some topic. And I felt like I had a pretty good grasp of what those options were, but I ran it into Chat GPT and most of what it spit back I knew, but it gave me one that I had forgotten about. And so I was able to include that and would not have been included. And it didn't take me that long to run that prompt, that query.
Yes, and shockingly, ChatGPT suggested that one of our topics would be AI in education. So here we are.
Well, I'm glad that it did that.
We are all so glad as well. We are getting close to wrapping up, but I don't want to cut off if anybody had any last questions or things that they wanted to express before we wrap up. No.
I think we should definitely point out that Tom is a real life human being, and that he's not AI generated.
Yeah, thank you. I should have led with that. I did not. Thanks for bringing it in at the end. So
Although that Planet Money I reference, they basically generated one of the regular hosts' voices, and you cannot tell the difference.
Wow.
that is really spooky.
Yeah. And if you want a fun one, Strike Force 5 was a podcast that the 5 late night hosts did while they were on the strike. And they have a sequence in one of their episodes where they did AI simulations of their voices. And it was eerie how close, like it was hard to tell the difference on most of them.
Yeah. Well, I said I was inspired and it's unsettled, and it's still true. But thank you so much, Tom. This was, I've already extolled the virtues of what you've done, but just to reiterate, thanks so much for taking the time to help us, work this through and giving us a lot of resources and a lot of things to think about. It's been a great conversation. Thank you also for all the participants who stayed around and asked questions and responded and, drove our understanding a little bit, forward, a little deeper. So Christine, I saw that you had put a little message, in the chat. Did you want to finish up just to, since you are our president, I'd like to give you the last word today.
Yeah, sure. My message was really just, if you are not a current member of PA-NOS, please consider joining. It's only $30 for the academic year. And these town halls are included in that, and lots of other professional development resources. And of course, we'd love to see you at the conference. One more plug, April 18th to 19th at Penn State Lehigh Valley. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.